A stark warning to Myanmar's government. Recognize Rohingya Muslims as citizens or face the consequences. An independent commission releases a wish list to help bring peace between Buddhists and Muslims. Will Aung San Suu Kyi's government honor the recommendations, or is more violence inevitable if grievances continue to be ignored? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rochelle Carey. Rohingya Muslims living in Buddhist-majority Myanmar say they are the world's most persecuted minority. They suffered years of oppression in Rakhine state with stories of extrajudicial killings, rape attacks, and homes burned down. Close to 90,000 sought sanctuary in neighboring Bangladesh following a crackdown by security forces in Myanmar last year. Rohingya were blamed then for the killings of soldiers and attacks on border posts. Now, a commission tasked with trying to reconcile the conflict has issued a long list of recommendations and is warning of the possibility of more extremism and violence if grievances continue to be ignored. The 63-page report calls on the government to revoke a controversial law preventing Rohingya from gaining citizenship. The commission, headed by a former head of the UN, Kofi Annan, makes 88 recommendations, including scrapping limits on freedom of movement for Rohingya. Also recommends the closure of refugee camps, home to around 120,000 Rohingya without access to basic needs like healthcare and education. And the commission wants an independent investigation into alleged atrocities and is calling for the guilty to be held accountable.
We are well aware that our recommendations on citizenship and freedom of movement touch on profound concerns of the Rakhine population. Nevertheless, the Commission has chosen to squarely face these sensitive issues because we believe that if they are left to fester, the future of Rakhine State and indeed Myanmar as a whole will be irretrievably jeopardized.
Our correspondent Andrew Thomas takes a look back at the roots of the conflict.
Tension between Muslim Rohingyas living in Rakhine State in the west of Myanmar and the Buddhist majority in the country goes back decades. Many Buddhists don't consider the Rohingya to be genuine Myanmarese, as many of their ancestors came to what was then called Burma as immigrants. Most came before Burmese independence in 1948 from what's now Bangladesh, when the British ruled both countries. Today, the million or so Rohingya in Rakhine State are denied citizenship. The latest round of violence has lasted years, but it began in 2012. That June, there were riots. Thousands of houses were set on fire. By October, nearly 200 people had been killed, some Buddhists, but more Rohingya. More than 100,000 Rohingya fled their homes. Campaign groups said the military was behind much of the violence. Human Rights Watch called their actions part of a campaign of ethnic cleansing. There was more violence in 2013, and in January 2014, according to the UN, more than 40 Rohingyan men, women and children were killed in Rakhine State during violence which began with accusations that Rohingyas had killed a Buddhist police officer. When Aung San Suu Kyi was elected in 2015, there were hopes that she would change the relationship between Myanmar's government and the Rohingya, but in fact the crackdown continued. Tens of thousands fled to camps or into Bangladesh in the wake of more conflict last year. The media and human rights groups were banned from travelling to parts of Rakhine State to see what was going on. More than 100 Rohingya died in that violence, which began after some Rohingyan men attacked a police border post in October, and soldiers poured into the area.
We have lots to discuss, so let's bring in our guests now. From Madrid, Gwen Robinson, the chief editor of the Nikkei Asia Review. And from London, Tun Kun, he's president of the Burmese Rohingya organization in the UK and a leading voice for Rohingya in exile. And thank you both for joining me. Tun, I'm going to start with you. How would you characterize this report?
Actually, we welcome the report, what we have seen this morning, but we cannot ignore what is happening right now in our Rakhine state. You know, the situation is deteriorating and situation is quite horrific situation we have seen so far in last few days. And the point is, report is quite good. You know, the Commission recommendations are really impressive, and the point here is how far Burmese government have willing to implement these recommendations, because we have seen last March in 2000. Last March, this year, March, we have seen the report, the Commission release recommendations, 30 points interim report, but there is no implementation we have seen so far. The other side, you know, there is currently the government, military, and other Rakhine nationalists, you know, escalating tensions, and which may bring further violence against Rohingya in Rakhine. So that might be a kind of excuse the government will use not to implement the recommendations from Kofi Annan Commission.
Let me ask you something, though, and we're going to get to those points. Let me ask you something, though. What in particular about this report do you like? What are the actionable recommendations that you like, that you think may have the most impact?
We have seen that top agenda that 1982 citizenship law should amend. That is the root cause of the problem. But the other side, we have seen main time before this to implement this law, what they will do. They mentioned about verification. So this verification will not be, this verification is a kind of tactics government been using to tag Rohingya as a Bengali. So there is some problems practically we have seen. And we have seen that restrictions of movement, marriage, education, these are quite, you know, immediate action the government can take, you know. And top priority is we have seen, you know, Rohingyas are facing serious humanitarian access blocked by government authorities and military. So this humanitarian aid access should be allowed. So these are quite top priority. I can see that the actionable.
Okay, to you now, Gwen. How would you characterize this report?
Well, I think it's actually a lot. It has gone further, I think, than widely expected, and particularly considering the interim report that was put out by the Commission earlier this year. You know, we didn't expect it to go quite so far on recommending these rather controversial or touchy things such as freedom of movement, which at the moment is extremely strictly controlled, and healthcare, equal access to healthcare, various things like that, and most of all raising this very thorny issue of citizenship, which, as anyone who's looked at Myanmar knows, it's absolutely the central core of this whole issue about, you know, the status of the Rohingya, which at the moment is completely unrecognised. So I think it has gone further, but obviously the big gap is to be expected. The Commission and Kofi Annan made very clear from the beginning that this is not a report into atrocities or human rights, but the glaring problems for the Rohingya and the situation in Rakhine is about human rights and the extreme military response. And in that respect, I think the fact that Kofi Annan even highlighted this as a problem in the report and at his press briefing, that the use of excessive military force is a problem, was also, you know, actually at least acknowledging that this is.
Could he have gone further in that regard?
Yes, I mean, obviously, I mean, the UN, of which he was a former head, has actually accused the Myanmar government of possible crimes against humanity. I mean, he's well aware of the enormity of allegations against the government. So yes, he could have gone further, but I think he actually, you know, stuck, and he made it very clear that his commission and his team would stick within the parameters of their mandate. And in fact, I think they've pushed it about as far as they could, and possibly a little beyond with some of these recommendations.
What enforcement mechanism is there to make any of these recommendations actually happen?
That is also a part of political willingness from NLD government. We have not seen, as I mentioned earlier, such political willingness from the government. So on that point, international community role is quite important. This Kofi Annan Commission was supported by international community. So international community like US, UK, EU, OIC, and you know, other countries, ASEAN countries should come together now. Is a kind of collective pressure is needed to set up timeline to implement these recommendations. Otherwise, you know, we worry that after 1 year there will be election campaign. So this recommendation will not be implemented. So the point here is urgently what's happening in current crisis in Rakhine state that need to be taken action from the international community to pressure. And same time, these recommendations are urgently needed to implement. So international pressure is quite a significant role here to pressure, because now international community is giving, you know, giving military some spaces. You know, they're welcoming them whenever they come to their countries, and military to military action have to stop, you know, from the US and other countries. So this kind of quite a stronger actions needed from international level.
Okay, so let me go back to Gwen and let her finish her thought on what you were saying about enforcement mechanisms to make this more than just another report.
Right. Thanks, and I'd also like to return to that very good point that was made that about enforcement and also international pressure. But in terms of the enforcement mechanism, the actual recommendation to set up some kind of secretariat to oversee the implementation of the report, well, you know, that could actually be an effective mechanism, or depending on the makeup and how it's approached and how Aung San Suu Kyi herself treats this secretariat, if one is to be established as per the recommendations of the report, will make or break that that secretariat and that mechanism. So I think, you know, the idea is good if you gave a secretariat teeth and possibly some real enforcement. But the trouble is, in Myanmar, with the military still at the core of politics and holding a veto power over constitutional changes in parliament and many other forms of power, it is up to whether the military would support any actions by such a secretariat, and in fact, if the military is represented on that.
Let me ask you about that, Gwen. You bring up a good point when you reference Aung San Suu Kyi. How much power does she really have to make this happen, to make these changes happen, to get the ball rolling on this?
Well, indeed, that's another crucial question. I mean, we all know, anyone who looks at Myanmar, as I said, knows the enormous power of the military. How much power would she have to make these changes? You know, given that there's 88 proposals, some of them are very minor. I think a lot of these are very easy because they're not particularly difficult issues. But on things like citizenship, freedom of movement, these are very, very difficult issues. And it will boil down to how much she really wants to make this happen and how much she can compromise or negotiate with the military. And, you know, there's no easy answer. It's not clear. But one thing is clear, she is not in charge of the armed forces. And this recent upsurge in violence we've seen makes it very clear that, you know, I mean, I think it's probably the last thing she wanted was some big military operation going on as the Kofi Annan report is launched. But I don't think she has any control over that.
Okay. Tun, what Kofi Annan also said, he obviously said the tension is high and can't continue, fearing that things could get worse. If this isn't a tipping point, what is? What else could possibly happen? How much worse could this get if this is not addressed? Tun.
The thing is, as far as what we can see so far in these few days and since October 9, serious mass rapes and mass killings and mass arrests been going on. And even last 2-3 weeks, the tension is rising on, escalating, and, you know, instigating by Rakhine extremists. That is what's happening. So the way we can see that, you know, such horrible violence may take place, and a state of organized violence can happen, and as how it's happened like 2012, that might be much more horrific situation we may face. That's what we worry. And another point is the military is perpetrating crimes indiscriminately, everywhere in Rakhine state. So this is quite serious situation, like what we've been hearing yesterday, Rakhine, and today Rakhine, some Rohingyas been killed, many Rohingya were arrested with false allegations. So this will be going, such impunity is going on there. So this will be much more widely human rights violation will face. And of course, there is some points NLD government could do. So this is important that without delay, NLD government have to implement recommendations, and I should say, is international role is important. The other side, military is still
okay. So let's. I want
to.
Can I stop you for just
willingness and NLD government?
Let me stop you for just a moment, too.
Leadership willingness and military.
So, okay, let me stop you for just a moment. You brought up a lot of good points about the international community. Let's talk about other countries that at least seem to be complicit in what is happening to the Rohingya. There are 40,000 Rohingya Muslims living in India, and a senior government official has told Reuters that they want to deport them. Gwen, is that something that they can do?
Look, I mean, number one, the Rohingya are stateless people. They do not have passports. They're not recognised by Myanmar. Where do you deport them to? They don't have a home. You can't deport them back to Myanmar. Myanmar will not accept them. But I think, with 40,000 Rohingya in India, but look there's at least 300,000 to 400,000 Rohingya refugees living along the border just inside Bangladesh, or at least, they're the figures that we constantly hear. There's hundreds of thousands living abroad, often in very squalid conditions, or through human trafficking, they end up in spots. I mean, these people have no status. If they can get citizenship from a third country, fine. But India, I think, is not being very realistic by thinking it can put them on a boat and take them back to Myanmar.
Right. What they're saying is that
they've got.
No, you're right. But what they're saying is they're in talks to send them back to Bangladesh and Myanmar. But your point is well taken. They may be saying that doesn't mean that's going to happen. That can happen. Well,
yeah, clearly. And this also goes to the heart of a big problem for the region. And we saw this in previous years of this explosion of boat people trying to get out of Myanmar. And it's all gone quiet lately, and the Kofi Annan Commission, I think, gave us some hope. But I do think, I agree with my co-panellists, that this upsurge, this resurgence of violence now is very nasty indeed. And the other problem, conversely, I think it's a double-edged sword that there's so much focus now by the international community and reports like this and international pressure on the military, and there is some, even though some of them are being welcomed abroad. There is pressure, I think, broadly linked to aid and support in the broader community. But a lot of this will, in fact, I think, send some of this insidious violence and action in Rakhine State underground, because the military is more aware now that people are watching,
that everybody's
the international community is watching, and they do not want more sanctions. Aung San Suu Kyi and her government were threatened by the UN with all kinds of charges of crimes against humanity, but they still...
To that point, isn't it in Myanmar's self-interest, at the very least, to address this?
Well, I mean, as I was about to say, Aung San Suu Kyi and her government felt free to deny access to the United Nations Human Rights Commission, which wanted to send a group to investigate these claims, and they were denied access, which... it's fine, it's their prerogative, but that came at a cost. And again, it further blackened the reputation, I think, of her and her government for upholding basic human rights. So, they've already shown themselves clearly to be quite hostile to the kind of interventions that the UN Human Rights Commission have made. And this is why they have... in fact, boosted the role of the Annan Commission, because it is the only commission that has been accepted by this government. And so I don't think we can expect much sympathy from Naypyidaw on other countries' initiatives on this front. One glimmer of hope might be what my co-panelist suggested, mentioning the region and ASEAN, because obviously Aung San Suu Kyi does care very much about Myanmar's role in this bloc. And ASEAN has made some headway, particularly the Muslim countries. Indonesia, Malaysia got some access to Rakhine State with aid. But, you know, it will take a lot more lobbying on ASEAN's part to maybe soften Myanmar's position about international involvement.
Okay. This commission is warning that if this issue is not addressed, that it is a breeding ground for radicalization. Give me your thoughts on that.
Actually, I should highlight that Rohingyas are peace-loving people. We are seeking the solution for the Rohingya people with a peaceful way. But there is some desperate individual being taken desperate actions in last October 2016. So Rohingya been facing persecution many decades. There is people been lost hope. You know, there is no action from international community. Even humanitarian aid access has been blocked. You know, there is for many months now. So, and you can see there is 140,000 IDPs in Sittwe. There is no talking about returning to their original place. You know, healthcare, medical care, and restriction of movement, marriage, education, land confiscation. There is, so people been losing hope. So military been rounding up their villages and raping their wives and sisters. So this is the way how people become such a, want to fight against. So there is so much hope. So that point is, if international community will not take action on time, then my situation may get worse. So nobody can stop whoever trying to fight against them, you know, because they say they've been rounded, the military been daily life, they are facing serious persecution, crimes by the military, even like happening yesterday and today in Rakhine township. Many Rohingyas been killed and many Rohingyas were arrested with false allegations. So in other parts of northern Rakhine, this is going on. I worry that, you know, when the people, they lost hope, there will be something they will find out to fight with the government. So this is time.
So it's about, I understand, I hear you.
So myself, you know, we need international community pressure to Burmese government, and Burmese government have to follow this recommendation. This will make situation much better.
Gwen, I would like your thoughts on that as well, that the warnings that this could become a fertile ground for radicalization. Do you agree with that?
Totally agree with that. And I mean, that's what we've already seen. So let's not forget, and I think maybe it's escaped or, you know, memories are short, but this recent extreme violence was triggered by attacks by Rohingya militants on police posts along the Bangladesh-Myanmar border, and the military claims, and there seems to be reasonable evidence to believe that at long last, after many, I mean decades of repression, some Rohingya activists are taking matters in their own hands. There is some sign that some are fighting back, and any slightest, or, you know, I mean, it was a tragic incident and people lost their lives in that attack. But on the broader scale of things, I think the level of human rights abuses that have been going on are enormous and dwarf any sort of action by Rohingyas themselves. But, you know, with this ongoing military operation and, you know, hundreds and hundreds being rounded up, put in jail, some tortured, all the allegations of atrocities, if this continues, yes, I mean, these people are being left with no option. If the Kofi Annan report is not acted on with some of the measures, the more sensible measures acted on, I think, you know, there is no alternative for these people but to get more and more radicalised.
Okay.
So, you know, that's something that I hope Naypyidaw is very well aware of.
Thank you very much to both of you for joining us for this conversation, Gwen Robinson and Tun Kun. And thank you as well for watching. You can see the program again anytime if you visit our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can join the conversation on Twitter as well. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Rochelle Carey, and the entire team. Bye for now.